So James, let's make sure that we introduce you. I'm here all the time, just friend of Capsule, basically. So James, tell us a little bit about you and your background and connection to Capsule. There.
Is this on? No. How about that? There it is. Okay. Thanks, Kitty. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm going to try and fill in for Aaron Keller, which will be very difficult, but I'll give it my best shot. My background is I came here about 25 years ago. I was recruited out here. My travels have taken me from the windows on Fifth Avenue to the boardroom, which is a very unplanned event. And I was recruited here to build a design capability and an innovation capability for Best Buy back at the late 90s, and held that position for 13 years. And it was a great joy. And I've always worked at the intersection of creativity and business, trying to make it somewhat of a fair fight along the way. And to be the voice of the creative young minds and their imagination that drives a lot of what happens in business, and to talk about the power of the economic value of creativity in business. So from there, I became the chairman of the board of Buffalo Wild Wings, another odd association, but that's my connection to the hospitality industry. And I am a desperate optimist, always looking for what's next.
Awesome. Very good. And certainly that will come through in our conversation today as well. Let's all welcome Portia Hart. She has joined us via our technology. Thank you, Zoom. Hello, Portia. Good afternoon.
Hi there. I don't know what I look like and how big I am. I'm slightly intimidated.
You're on a large screen here. You look fantastic. Tell us where you're tuning in from.
So I'm tuning in from Cartagena de Indias, which is in the northern coast of Colombia in the Caribbean. I've tried to hide all of my palm trees so you guys don't feel too jealous. You'll hear from the accent that I'm British by birth, but I've lived in Colombia for the last 10 years. And before that, I was working in the south of France. It's interesting to hear James talk about journeys that are not planned. As my primary reason for leaving the UK nearly 20 years ago was to get away from the bad weather, which is what took me to the south of France. Originally, I spent 8 years working in the super yacht industry. And here in Cartagena, I am a hotelier. It's been a complete about face. I run my own small projects, and we champion what we call now regenerative tourism. I try to be the bridge between consumerism and hospitality and make sure that the business is working for both sides of the transaction.
So even though we can't see palm trees, we can just feel the right? We can just feel the atmosphere coming through. Thank you. Well, welcome. We're happy to have you here today. David and Wendy, let's have each of you introduce yourselves as well.
Hi, I'm Wendy Meadley. I'm the CEO of Expo 2031 Minnesota, USA, and we are the organizing and legal entity to bring a World Horticultural Expo to the USA here in Minnesota, and obviously in 2031. Little background is, so marketing anchored and started with production, radio, some corporate roles, most recently social impact, and a lot of different entrepreneurial ventures. And now this is probably the biggest one yet.
Hello, everyone. My name's David Loehr, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Expo 2031. And for nearly 38 years, I've been an architect. And in those 38 years, I've been practicing in private firms and have had a variety of different kinds of roles, everything from, operational leaders and chief operating officers and all those kinds of things. But almost always throughout those 38 years, I've had a side hustle. And those side hustles have been things like being an adjunct professor at the University of Minnesota, or being on boards of nonprofit organizations. And one of my sort of passion side hustles has been to try to bring an expo to Minnesota. And so that's been kind of weaved through my entire career. And if I could, just a little bit of an origin story as we kind of set up. I'd like to provide a little bit of insider insight into what sucked me into the expo world, and that being a call I received from the former mayor of St. Paul, Mayor Chris Coleman, and he invited me to a beer and pizza, thinking about what we could do next. There was talk, the Metrodome had collapsed and we were building a new stadium. We were going to go after a Super Bowl, but what could be next after that? And so I literally looked up, Googled things like Davos or South by Southwest or World's Fairs. And so, in the course of the evening, I just kind of regurgitated what I read on Wikipedia. And the first thing they said was, you should be on the committee. And I said, what committee? And they said, you get to start the committee for bringing an expo to Minnesota. So that was in 2012. And shortly after, kind of Wendy joined the parade of the different things. So
2 years later.
yeah.
Okay, so can you explain what Expo 2031 is?
Oh, wow. It's a really big question. What it is today is, so a World Horticultural Expo is, think about we in America call these things world fairs. A World Horticultural Expo is a green industry centric World's Fair in American language. So think of a mashup of an edutainment, a Disney kind of thing with a botanical garden. There's nothing like it that's been done in America before. They're common all over the world, but what it'll look like here in 2031 is 6 months of
Well, I describe a couple of elements.
There's so many parts.
There'll be about 60 countries that will come to Minnesota. They'll build out a display. That display might be a pavilion or a garden or some kind of element that tells their story of what we're asking them to do for an expo here. And the theme that we've chosen is human nature, where humanity and horticulture meet. And so there's lots of different elements, and Wendy will get into some of those details, I'm sure, during the course of this conversation about what we're all kind of thinking of those kinds of themes. But those 60 countries or so will also bring heads of state. They'll have country days. We'll have other kinds of exhibits on display about what it means to be horticulture here in Minnesota. And also across the US, because this is a US-led venture about having an exhibit. As Wendy said, 6 months, we anticipate 4 million visitors. It'll be on a site, and we can't really talk about site today. So if you ask me any questions, I'm going to cut that off right now. We don't want to have speculation for the land or before we get all the sort of everything lined up at the moment. And so we'll kind of go from there. But, and we have some thoughts about what this could be after 2031. What does it evolve after? So.
And what's special about a U.S. World Expo or a World's Fair is that it is collaboratively created by business, industry, public-private partnership. And so all the other governments in the world, they build their World's Fairs. And in America, we get to do it as citizens and as businesses. And so that's really exciting.
Very, very interesting. Portia, had you heard of this before?
No, well, we have something on a much smaller scale in the UK known as the Chelsea Flower Show. And it's a huge item on the social calendar for anybody that lives in London. And it's a much, much smaller version, but the idea of telling the stories of countries through their natural habitat, plant life, horticulture is something that I did grow up with, but it's really exciting to hear about it on this scale, I have to say.
The Chelsea Flower Show is a great example of what what the countries would bring to the table. That's special in England, yeah.
James, I'm going to throw it over to you because you crafted some beautiful questions that I know you wanted to send to our guests.
Thanks, Kitty. I guess my first question is where we last left off in our meeting, And I'd love for everybody, Portia's laughing, I'd like to hear from everybody your story about how this brought you to where you are and what were some of the pain points that you had to encounter along the way to keep your passion alive throughout what I am sure some obstacles along the way. So, Portia, I would love to start with you.
I know that I'm in trouble because I was laughing, so I got picked first. The reason I was laughing, it's such a fantastic question. I remember one of the things you said to us when we spoke was, you need to pass through pain to get to a breakthrough. I run a small hotel on an island in a country which, is, you may well know, has only really been open to tourism for a decade or so. We have no running water on the islands. There is a school some of the time, but many people that live on the islands haven't had a formal education. We have electricity, more or less. When it's there, it's there. When it's not, it's not. There are no paved roads. There's no public services, no transport. So when you talk about pain and obstacles, it's difficult for me to pick one. But what I would say is actually all of those things that I've just listed and every obstacle that I come across has been an opportunity to lean further into what I'm doing. I was born in the global north. I was born in the UK. I've lived for many years in the south of France. Both of those are privileged places. And I was able to live in ignorance, shall we say, of many of the inequalities and hardships that actually the majority of the global population face. Here in Colombia, I face them too. But rather than seeing it as difficulty, it serves as an inspiration because, in that phrase that everybody's grandmother says to them, but by the grace of God, there go I. Had I been born one generation earlier, I would have been born, my mother was born in Trinidad and Tobago. Had I been born one geography across, I would have grown up with those obstacles and wouldn't have had the opportunities that I have. So for me, really a big part of those pain points is just to encourage me to work harder and to find solutions so that people on my islands have the same opportunities that I had, so that they can go on and do great things on a much bigger scale than I'm doing. I believe profoundly that if you want something done, you've got to do it yourself. And if you take care of those who are immediately around you and you take care of the environment that is immediately around you, you'll hopefully inspire others to do the same. And if everybody does that, then we solve a lot more than we think we can.
Love the story. A follow-up to that for you, and will be for each one of you guys, is the importance of culture, starting first with what is the dominant value proposition, what makes you different, and how it is tied to the community, which I find very interesting. And that has to exude itself through an employee experience. So if you could just give us a perspective on that, I appreciate it.
I think, it's really easy when you're traveling, especially if you're in a cold country and it's the winter and you want to go somewhere warm and sunny. It's so easy to look at everything through the lens of your own position, right? I'm exhausted. My life is stressful. I work too many hours. I'm freezing. I need to get somewhere in the Caribbean. I need some sunshine. I need a pina colada. I need to relax. And actually in the travel industry, we even use words like product when we talk about destinations. I've seen it now from the other side that hospitality, it is a transaction, but at its base, it's really about me saying, welcome to my home. And the best hospitality experiences that you get when you are that kind of burned out global northerner that needs some sunshine is when the person on the other side of that transaction is genuinely pleased to see you. And the warmth that will come through from that hospitality is very different from just serving you a glass of champagne and passing you the bill. It's a conversation. You're going to learn a bit more about them. As humans, we're naturally empathetic. You're going to feel that person is happy to have you in their space. And so, I say this because I always am a bit nervous about coming across as a really nice person. I'm not a really nice person. I really want my businesses to do well. And I realize that for my businesses to do well, my team has to be happy. And that's my responsibility. Obviously, I would love for all travelers to go everywhere in the world and be their best selves, right? And be as nice as possible to the person taking care of them, be really friendly to the customer service agent in the airport. But I know that we can't rely on all of us to be ourselves all the time. So as an employer, that's my job. My job is to make my team as happy as possible so that they can take care of my clients and so I can make lots of money. And how do we do that? We give people space, we listen to them. We raise their own expectations of their own lives. So when I started working at Blue Apple, when I started on the island, most of my team had never even dreamed of having a passport. They'd never been on an aeroplane. They'd never been to a restaurant. I remember our first Christmas party. We went to a nice restaurant in Cartagena, and almost everyone on my team blew their entire month's salary buying an outfit because it was the first time that they were going to a smart restaurant. And so I realized that a lot of it is about building up confidence, and a lot of it is about making my team feel that they are on a level with the people that we're taking care of. And my best example of that, because it's a fantastic anecdote, is that actually one day Jeff Bezos came for lunch, and he had lunch at the bar. He didn't look that happy, but I'd like to think it wasn't our fault. And at the end of the day, my bartender said to me, "You know what, Porsche? I feel pretty good about myself right now." And I said, "Is that because you got to serve a mojito to the richest man on the planet?" And he said, "No, it's because I think I'm happier than the richest man on the planet." And, I thought, I've done my job, right? Here's a guy that comes to work, enjoys what he does, and he feels so secure in himself that he's not aspiring for something that's out of his reach. He knows exactly what he wants, and he knows that he can get it.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Portia. I'm gonna send it over to you, Wendy.
Great, I get to follow that, huh?
Pain points and culture.
Okay, pain points. So when you're building something that hasn't happened in America since 1984, you're spending a lot of time helping people understand what it is. You noticed when in the middle of my description, when we started, I paused because it's this giant elephant, or it's more like a herd of elephants. And so my pain point is navigating the unknown, and navigating through that is a constant thing every day, all the time, as the leader of it, because what you're doing is I always use a historical reference, and David's going to start laughing at me. I use the reference of Lewis and Clark. So most people in America understand that reference, and what you may not know is that Minnesota was part of the Louisiana Purchase, and they were supposed to go and chart the Louisiana Purchase. And as they put their team together, you can imagine it's the early 1800s, and they've got horses and people, and maybe there are 30 people, right? And they're traveling across, and each day they know they've got to feed everybody, and there's a whole set of things that have to happen for the wagon train to keep on going, right? But in a new day, there's weather, there's all different kinds of things that happen. You sent people out for food, they came back, no deer, rats. What are we going to do? Maybe kill a horse, who knows, right? So you have to keep going no matter what maybe the 100 different stakeholders you already have are early on. So you just keep knowing. We talked about it the other day because we were in one of those moments where I said, okay, well, everybody's standing looking at us and wondering where the food is tonight. What are we going to do? And that's where we came up with that kind of, well, maybe we kill a horse, maybe we eat some of those bushes, that kind of thing. So the unknown and keeping it going no matter what comes up in the day is my pain point.
Well, James, I might skirt around that question a little bit, because as a creative, as a designer, as an architect, my design process has been much more reiterative and much more about kind of pivoting and finding, when you kind of up with those obstacles, those kinds of areas that might be tough to break through, finding options. That's been the sort of creative impetus about making sure that there's some ways through this, or some ways to kind of work around it, dealing with pragmatic issues like budgets, or dealing with like creative, inspirational ideas. And I think that's maybe a little bit more, more pedestrian, more of a kind of a common thing, a thing that I think I see across a lot of creatives, in which it's not this lightning bolt of inspiration that strikes, but not to say that there aren't big obstacles or big things that we have to work through. They just don't become crushing in sort of what their pain point might be. And so, when I think about this for how it applies even to the expo, our effort there's many, many different kinds of obstacles, hurdles we've gone through. And had someone told me that back in 2012, I would have thought, maybe somebody else should be, along for the ride. But the other part of the question is about like sort of how does it connect on a cultural basis? And maybe for this group, if you don't mind, I'd like to share a little bit about an insider's view of the design process and forms of inspiration that's come out for Expo 2031. And so for Expo 2031, initially there were maybe two sources that I looked at. One was we have a really terrific world-renowned river system, the Mississippi River. And as Wendy and I have traveled across the globe on this effort, everyone knows about the Mississippi River, but we have lakes and rivers, and all those things are really part of our being here in Minnesota. Plus the sanctioning body, the International Association of Horticulture Producers, they use a phrase, their sort of tagline is the power of plants. And so those two ideas became the early genesis for me about like how do those things come together to form some ideas about giving some form or some ideas to what an expo might be about. And so there was a lot of research that I did, a lot of like experimentation, a lot of like starts and stalls on that. And, I looked under floral patterns, and I looked under things about like the very flat rocks that we find in our lake beds and our river beds. And that's very Minnesotan, but they can become inspirations of form. And as I explored those ideas a little bit further, I came across a terrific vehicle. I looked at fleur-de-lis and other kinds of elements that might be form givers, but I came across a form from over 2,000 years ago from Persia or from India. These sort of roots are a little unknown, but it cuts across cultures, many cultures, in the form of a paisley pattern. And true to Minnesota, paisley also had a very significant role in our identity here in Minnesota with Prince and Paisley Park. And so now that's become a real strong form giver as we looked at ways to organize a site or conditions on the site, or to talk a little bit about this power of plants and its expression through that. And we have given presentations. Wendy and I have been in Suncheon, South Korea. We've been in Doha, Qatar. We've been in Warsaw, Poland over the last year and a half. And our thoughts on this have cut across all those cultures. It resonates with everyone in terms of what we're talking about. So, how we look at it and how we get to that point is a little bit of a reiterative process and looking at those options. So it's not a straight line. It's never A to B, it goes around, and sometimes it takes a lot of dips. But the fact of the matter is finding that, and then finding some sort of cultural meaning to us here in Minnesota, but also something that can be universal, is really important for the success of the expo. So, yeah.
Back to you, Kitty.
Do you miss being an architect? It was your entire career. I mean,
he's still going to be one.
Yeah, you're very much architecting something here with a very long due date attached to it. But
what excites me is that there's a real transformation that's occurring, not just in the architectural industry, but in society as a whole. And the tools of AI image generation is like profound, and kind of where things are going in our profession is really different. And I really want to embrace that future. So, being part of the future through Expo 2031 is a really important part of sort of where I am. And, some people may see me and my identity as being linked back to being a practitioner in a firm and doing that kind of work. And that's only given me skills. I've worked in 24 different countries with projects. I've been to over 100 countries, and sort of having that sort of global outlook is really important. It's really important for making Expo 2031 successful. So for me, it's about like future oriented and looking to the future.
I think we are all so aware now how small the world is, which I think is so wonderful. Portia, thinking about what you're doing and where you are and how you attract people to come to your areas. I don't remember if we talked about this last week on our call or not, but I'm wondering if as you are reaching people and encouraging them to come and experience the experience that you're creating there, there's likely a perception of the country maybe not being the safest place. How do you navigate that? Just kind of, what are you finding in that area? I believe that perception is correct.
I mean, you're
out
not
there.
I remember when I first said I was moving to Colombia, and there were lots of horrified stares. I mean, on a very personal level, one of the things that I say to anyone that's asking me, like, how safe is Colombia? I've lived here for 10 years. I'm a single woman. I run my own business on an island, and I've never had a problem. I feel extremely safe here. I actually do recommend Cartagena as a fantastic destination for solo female travelers. And I think there's obviously an element of fear, which is mostly come from a lot of the media that we see around what was a very sensational story for Colombia's history. My personal experience is that since I've been here, I feel safer walking through the streets of Cartagena in the evening than I do, let's say, walking through certain parts of London. I feel like I'm more likely to get pickpocketed perhaps in Barcelona. I would always say to anyone traveling anywhere, be really respectful. So if you're traveling to a country where the national minimum wage is the equivalent of a dinner, then maybe it's not the right place to wear your Rolex or to wear your diamond earrings. Not because it's not safe, but because if you imagine in your own context, seeing someone walking down the street carrying like a giant wheelbarrow behind them that had like $2 billion in cash in it, and you think, well, that could definitely pay my kids' education and they wouldn't even notice it. And that is sometimes inequality can manifest itself as fear or danger. Sometimes it's just simply a question of perhaps being unaware and being a little bit inconsiderate by flaunting what might to someone be extreme wealth, which for you is just something quite normal. And the classic one is the latest iPhone. I'm always like, the latest iPhone is several months of salary for most people in the world. So if you're walking down the street kind of on it, texting on it, you're putting temptation out there. I find the Colombians to be charming. I feel safe here. And my favorite stat about Colombia, it is not the most dangerous country in the world. It is, in fact, the second most biodiverse country in the world after Brazil. And if you make it per square meter, then it is the most biodiverse country. It is the country that has the most species of birds at any given moment because of its endemic species and also the migratory species that come through. It's an amazingly wealthy country in terms of natural resources. We have several different climatic zones all piled into one place. So we've got desert, we've got snow-capped mountains, we've got rainforest, we've got jungle, we've got beaches. To write it off because it feels scary is to miss out. And we've seen tourism grow over the last few years. And so I hope that we're going to see more and more of it. But ask questions, listen to the answers, and don't let Netflix make all your decisions for you.
This one is for Wendy. As CEO of Expo 2031, please share with us your journey from the U of M, majoring in speech communication and broadcast production, and how it has led you, surprised you, and prepared you for this incredible world event.
So, little did I know when I did my undergrad in broadcast production, when this is a day when we're still taking audio and videotape and taping it together, right? And doing our senior project of music videos because they were brand new. So now you know how old I am. On beta, Sony beta format, right? So I didn't realize how much of how I landed on that being really my true life's passion. But there's a number of people in the room that I've worked with, and throughout my life, I guess it's about content and creation and messaging and thinking about that. And when you now have a career that's more than 20 years, I'll just stop at 20, there's more, you start realizing what you're good at, what you like. And if you're lucky enough that you've educated yourself and you've been fortunate in some of the choices you've made, you get a chance to, as you go on, choose the work you do, choose who you work with, et cetera. And so what we've done with Expo, as David talks so about the stage that we've set, part of what we are baking in is a content strategy because we need people to get involved. And in order to do that, the days of people raising their hand and being good corporate citizens and just, help fund us because you're supposed to, those days are gone. Much like the days where we tape things together, right? So now you find a model where you're content centric, you start thinking about topics. And when David's talking about the creative process, we've built 8 areas that we believe convene the conversations of today that will anchor us all the way up to 2031, not knowing what that looks like, what phones will look like, what format will be right. But we do know what we think user experience might look like and what people are interested in. People are interested in what they care about, local, regional. And so we're working with a number of creative folks to bring that to life and a number of brands and people. And so when I think of back then to now, all those chess pieces are the same. They just look differently now.
Well put. It strikes a chord with me because I was a dropout conducting major. And what I learned from it, and it's led me to wonderful places, is that we realize that we can't do everything ourselves, right? And that the power of assembly and diversity of voice and thought is so very important in everything that we do. And once you can confront that and face it, it's actually a wonderful thing because you bring your entire self, but you're relying on the genius of all the others that you surround yourself with.
And expos bring together the greatest minds of the time. When you say genius, greatest minds of the time, thinking about things in that moment, in that time, in that place.
Exactly. Well put. David, if you have anything to add to that, certainly welcome. If not, I'll hit you with another question.
Why don't we go another question, please?
Another question.
25 for 100.
Okay. First of all, congratulations on your recent appointment as Chief Strategy Officer of Expo 2031. Your path is a most interesting one, especially centered at the intersection of art and science and architecture. This path has been guided by your values, your compass in the arenas of environmental stewardship and social responsibility. Please share with us your sources of inspiration, mentorship, and leaders in your field that have guided you on this path, and how have your values played a role in your life and career?
There's only a few things to unpack there, James. So we have a lot of things here.
I love Portia's space.
Well, a couple of things to touch on, and without getting too far off, and not take until 7 o'clock tonight to talk about all this as well. So I think the idea about having a sense of environmental stewardship and social responsibility is like core. It's not something that gets added to the work. the work that's either project work or even my own. I live in a house that's a zero emissions house. I drive a zero emissions vehicle. And those are easy things. In fact, I came across an article recently that talked about, well, there's the enthusiasts and there's the minimalists when it comes to kind of environmental responsibility issues. And they talk about the minimalists are the ones that kind of like, they are light touch on the land, and they do a lot of things about their own kind of path. And the enthusiasts are the ones who like look at new policies and new technologies to try to solve the issues around us. And I kind of vacillate between the two a little bit, but I think there are some real opportunities ahead of us to solve some really pressing issues in our society, in our planet, and that's important. That's like sort of grounding element for what that's about. And on sort of people who've been sources of inspiration or leaders or mentors, I'll tell a fun little story. It goes off on a little side, but as a graduate student, as an intern, I was working in an organization called the Milwaukee Redevelopment Corporation, and we sponsored speakers that would come in. And I had the opportunity to host one of the speakers coming in from the outside. His name was Edmund Bacon. And Edmund was the city of Philadelphia city planner. And he had just released a book, and he had some film coming out. And one of my tasks was to coordinate this. This was before cell phones, it was barely fax machines, those kinds of things. So we had to call and make these arrangements. And I was going to pick him up in my little VW Golf at the airport and bring Edmund Bacon, this speaker, this thought leader, world famous thought leader, to this conference. And then he called up and said, oh, I've got my sons are around. Can they come with me? Sure. Okay. We all piled in my little car. We took him to the hotel, and they said, well, why don't you have a drink and dinner with us? Sure. So anyways, the presentation went great. My hero at the time, Edmund Bacon, was terrific. And I was like in awe of Edmund Bacon. And after the meeting, everyone said, well, how was it? And I said, Edmund was great. No. Like his son. I go, yeah, whatever. I don't remember their names. Kevin is Edmund Bacon's son. And so I had no idea that Kevin
Bacon was in your Volkswagen Golf?
In my Volkswagen Golf, the back seat had to have his bag on top of his lap. And, we had dinner together, but I'm sure he doesn't remember that himself, but is memorable for me, but only because of his dad. His dad was the person that was like, a source of inspiration. So
6 degrees.
Along the course of my career, there's been moments of like meeting with John Kerry, the Secretary of State, in Milan at the Milan Expo in 2015 to try to convince him. He had just broken his leg from a bicycle accident, about kind of supporting the Minnesota effort. So, there's moments of time like that we all need to kind of recognize and take advantage of, and kind of live in the moment about what those are. And so I'd say it's a more of a accumulation of those experiences that have kind of formed my point of view. So now you get to know the Edmund Bacon, not Kevin, Edmund Bacon story.
Now, does that mean everyone in the room is 6 degrees from?
I think so.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I think so. Portia, are there people that you can tell us about who've been particular sources of inspiration for you?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not Jeff Bezos, but we're not far off. So I was born into a household. My mum was born in the developing world. She, her mum was 16 when she had her. She was kind of put on a boat and shipped off to the UK with nothing when she was a little girl. And she became an opera singer, and she married my father, and she sang in the Sydney Opera House. She was one of the first women of color to be a solo artist in many of the world's opera houses. So I grew up in a household where the idea is, yeah, you can do it, right? Whatever you want to do, you can do it. And we didn't make a big deal out of it. My parents were just always, you want to do that thing? Go ahead. And it was when I left kind of the shelter of university, and people started to say to me, yeah, but that's not possible. And those people have actually become the biggest inspirations in my life. So I remember I left uni and I was having a drink with a friend, and I said, life in London is pretty miserable, mate. I live in an underground flat. I take an underground train to go to work. I work in an underground office with no windows, and I earn less money than I spend in rent. And she said, yeah, but mate, that's life. That's the real world. That's what being an adult is. And the next day I sent my CV off to anywhere where the sun shines. And within 3 weeks, I was living in Monaco. And I lived in a house with a pool, and I spent far less than I earned on my rent. And my life improved dramatically. And then I was having lunch down in the south of France on a beach club one day, and I said to my friend I was having lunch with, I was like, pretty cool to have a beach club, don't you reckon? Like, you go to work in your swimwear and you see people happy all the time. And he said, yeah, mate, come on. You're never going to have a beach club. And those are two of the conversations that set me on the path of my life. One sent me down to Monaco and the other sent me to Colombia. So I always have in the back of my mind the people that told me I couldn't, with no animosity, I should say, with only gratitude. And then the other people that I admire are the people who changed my mind. So I think one of the things that we see about the world in which we live in today, and I know we talk a lot about polarized opinions and everyone's on one side or the other side. I absolutely love it when I come across somebody who's able to tell me that I've been completely wrong about something for most of my life and can get me to see it from another point of view. And that was what happened to me. It was COVID, my hotel was closed, and I picked up a book called Donut Economics, written by a female economist called Kate Raworth. And Kate Raworth taught me that everything I knew about neoliberal economics was completely wrong. And the entire capitalist system was not really serving community or society, and it certainly wasn't serving the planet. And so I just redesigned my business based on Kate's economic theory, which is donut. I won't dive into it because we'll be here again way past 7. And then a couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine, listening to me rant on about these kinds of things, gave me a book by another economist, but who was also really a city planner. And she's a lady called Jane Jacobs. She was writing in the 90s. Another woman who was told she couldn't. And she has written some amazing books on American cities, actually, and how they've developed and how the city and town planning owes it to its citizens to create the best possible environment for everybody. And now we can actually structure society and economics so that they protect the planet and provide everyone with everything that they need. So they're not people I've met. Sadly, there's no Hollywood actors in there. But they're people that have caused me to ask the question about if what I'm taking for granted is really serving me, my community, and the planet that's hosting all of us.
That's great. And travel and experiences are also, we know that they are also an amazing source of inspiration. We always, in this audience, we always have a lot of creatives, a lot of marketers, a lot of business executives. And what's one of the most common questions that we ask, where do you get your inspiration? How do you stay fresh? And travel is often one of those. So Portia, it was 17 below this week in Minneapolis. So we're all in that mindset. We're like, when is our next trip? So here's a question to everyone. When you decide to take a break and go on vacation, do you go and completely check out, or do you go, there is some inspiration that can come from that, or do you go and you are actively looking to be inspired by the experiences that you are taking in around you? There's no right answer to it. But I'm always curious about, how people look at their vacations. Are you just laying on a beach, which is great, I'm not judging, or are you immersing yourselves into the experience and really coming back feeling like you're filled with a whole new vigor for what you're doing?
Okay, are you going to go for raised hands? So lay on the beach, raised hands.
Who's laying on the beach? I'm laying on the beach.
I can see everybody now.
I've got a few hands.
Inspo is the other one, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Seeking inspo.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the hands were doing that.
I mean, I have to say, I think as a practitioner in the field of hospitality, and you notice that when you asked for my source of inspiration, I didn't reel off a list of famous hoteliers. That isn't because I don't admire anyone in my industry, but I think it's because my industry could work a lot harder to make sure that you can do both. Relax, lay on the beach, find inspiration, be culturally immersed. And we do, there's a small example of something that we do at Blue Apple. When somebody orders a gin and tonic, often they'll say to me, can I have a Hendrix and Fever Tree? And our response to that is, we're really sorry, we don't carry Hendrix and we don't carry Fever Tree. We carry gins that are made in Colombia. Our gin that we serve primarily is made right here in Cartagena, and the tonic is made in Medellin. And that's an opportunity for us to talk about the liquor industry in Colombia, what's coming up, to explain to people that the money that they're spending on this gin and tonic is actually 100% of it staying in the country instead of a bunch of it going back to London to Hendrix. Or going on to a publicly listed company buying from Fever Tree. So you're able to talk to someone about what's local, what's cultural, what's new and innovative, because we're not all trapped in our own historical cultures, right? If that were true of the British, we'd be in a horrible place. And also, what are our values as a company, and what could of those values could they take home with them, and could they spread? And this is why I love travel, and I love people that travel, because they take an idea from Bhutan and they bring it to Norway. And then they take it from Norway and then they go back home to New Jersey. And these ideas that they pick up along the way travel like a virus, but it's a virus of positive things. So I think on both sides, we can work a bit harder to make sure that you can have everything you need from your vacation. And then as a traveler, you can go in and say, well, I still want to have my pina colada, but can I have it with a rum that was made locally? And where do you guys get your coconuts and your pineapples?
Well, you're both creating experiences that are inspiring. How are we on time? Questions? Let's do some questions from the audience. James, did you have any other questions as well?
I had one specifically for Portia, if I may, if we have time.
Okay, so start thinking about your questions. I'll bring the mic to you.
Portia, your journey is taking you from the university in Scotland, growing up in the UK, to the south of France, and now Cartagena. I'm struck by a quote that you made in your journey and discovery that I'd like you to speak about. And that quote is, "The spirit of hospitality is not possible if the employees themselves are not treated with respect." Could you elaborate on that?
I mean, I think that really was part of my fundamental realization that if I'm going to go to somebody's house and have a drink or a meal there, then I really want them to welcome me. And so I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to be happy that I'm in their home, because it's going to give me the best experience as a guest. And I think also something that I saw, and it was again during COVID, we were closed for 7 months by government decree. And that meant that, I mean, there were no restaurants that could open, no hotels. Everyone in Colombia was in their homes. Lockdown was really, really severe. And we had people that had no means of buying food, no means of keeping going. And we ran this campaign because we also had a lot of time on our hands. I got out, we used technology, and we had our team film themselves in their own homes. And those of them that could make it to the hotel in a safe way and do what it was in the hotel did so. And it was bring a bit of Blue Apple to our guests' homes, right? So we had our bartenders would make the Blue Apple mojito. We had some of our housekeepers that would show how to get that magic crisp Blue Apple beds. We had our boat captains went out and went fishing, and they showed people how to gut a fish. And we had our chefs do different dishes from the menu. And we put it all up online, and we said, look, if you like what you saw, tip us something in the Venmo jar, right? Tips for tips. We'll tip you how to bring Blue Apple to your house if you'll just leave $1 behind. And we raised about $20,000, which in Colombia was enough to keep most of our team in food and shelter for the duration of the 7 months. And I think that the fact that the team was willing to do that, the fact that it had such a good response as a business owner, it gave me great content, and it kept us relevant during a really difficult time. Just serves again as a reminder, we're all human. One day I'm the customer, one day I'm the waitress. You know, we're all the same. And if you're going to a place that isn't making their staff feel like that, I just don't think you're going to have the same high quality experience. And I don't think you're going to leave inspired, because you're going to be locked out of the culture where you are. And the best way to experience any country's culture, speak to the people that are working there.
You've leaned into humanity in a big way, and God knows we need more of that as a hello today, and to invite that into everything that we do. And we so appreciate that response, and it's so very important. If we don't lean in with love and passion, then we're probably not in the right place, and that we have to keep on the journey, because it's love and it's passion that are the forces of breakthrough and creation. And I just love the energy from all of you surrounding that key note in why we're here in the first place, just to get along and collaborate with one another and make good things happen.
Question? There we go.
Portia, my father just came back from Colombia from 3 weeks out there birding, so I'll have to ask him about his trip. I don't think he made it to your place, but I know he loved it. So I liked your example about this, in your experience, you built in this moment where people ask for a drink and you say, well, we actually don't have that. I want you to think about that a different way. And so you've designed this kind of speed bump in the experience that causes people to rethink their choices, and they may still ultimately decide to go with their original choice or something like that. I'm curious if there are other ways that you built in speed bumps, kind of moments for learning into the experience where you're at. And I'm also curious if in the expo, if you're thinking about that as you're building this design, this experience, if there are ways in which suddenly I have to walk from the parking lot to the expo in a different way or something like that, where you've built in kind of a learning moment so that people have to kind of think about the impact of their choices. So Portia, if you want to start, and then if you want to move to it.
Thank you. I specialize in speed bumps. You know, if you're speaking to somebody that says the people that inspire are the ones that tell us she can't do stuff, you can guarantee I'm doing it to my clients all the time. I think the best story I've got for this is if you ever do make it to Blue Apple, you'll see that on the back of everybody's uniforms, it says in really big letters, "Usted no sabe quién soy yo," which means in Spanish, "Do you know who I am?" And as we all know, that's something that very important people like to say when they want to skip a line or they want to get in somewhere where they don't have a reservation. And when I very first opened Blue Apple, I was at that point, on front desk, I was the receptionist, I was the waitress, I was everything. And a lady came in and she said, I've got a reservation for 15 people for lunch. I didn't have a table for her. Long story short, she really bawled me out in front of everybody. And she said to me, "Usted no sabe quién soy yo." You don't know who I am. I'm friends with the owner and I'm going to make sure that she finds out about this. I honestly, at that point, was so terrified by this angry woman shouting at me in Spanish that I just was like, "I'm so sorry, let me find you a table." And at the end of the day, she said to my waiter, "I'm going to let my friend, the owner, know that you guys were able to solve things." And he said, "Well, she's standing right there. Why don't you do it?" She had the good grace to come to me and to apologize for her behavior. And she told me, "I think I muddled you up with your sister," which is hilarious because my sister had never been to Colombia. She's a colonel in the British Army. But anyway, we let it slide. The next day, I sent out for 100 polo shirts, and on the back it says, "You don't know who I am." And that is my first lesson. You come onto my property, you see my team, and they are all somebody. They are all your equal. And that line does not work in my place. And we get about 2% of our clients will make a comment, "Hey, I don't like that you've got that on your shirts." 98% of my clients buy the t-shirt and take it home with them. So it also became a great stream of revenue for us.
Thanks for sharing that, Portia. I think I know the owner.
You can say that when you come to Blue Apple.
Yeah. Well, it's a really good question about like how do you build in experiences along the way, and some of the idea of designing an expo is about looking at the wide array from 3 to 90 of ages of people and how from different cultures, and how are they all going to experience it? How are they going to like all come for either a moment, or are they coming for 2-3 days of seeing this? So we are thinking about a lot of different things, and we know that it's not just going to be contained to as you enter into expo grounds. Wendy and I heard a terrific presentation recently about the super bloom at the Tower of London in the moat. And we want to take this idea to Minnesota, in which they replanted the kind of scruffy grass moat around the Tower of London, but they did it in another exceptionally good way. They touched base and they gave the same kind of seed mix to school groups, And then the school groups and the super bloom of the moat itself monitored the progress of the blooming of those kind of plants, and they tracked it, and they kind of gave people an online experience. And so we know that there's going to be moments about being on site that are very authentic and sincere and seeing that, and we have to capture that moment. There's also going to be, by 2031, a whole streaming and digital platform that we have to address along the way as well. And a reach out into the community that's not everyone's going to be able to come here. So how do we make that, broaden that? So that's just one of hundreds of little examples that we're working towards.
And to tap into the last piece that you said and talking about the digital experience, there's 8 billion people in the world. And so we can bring some of the experience to folks through, we look at the timeline being in 2-year chunks. So first 2 years is more B2B. The second 2 years, we will go into virtual and gaming and metaverse and that whole thing to start helping people understand what it could possibly be. Not the same as obviously touching the ground, et cetera. And then the last 2 years, we have a lead up of how do you then start experiential custom campaigns with partners where you're activating, leading into an experience at, on site, something real. And what David talked about is a great example of how all of those digital campaigns can have a real life component. If you look at what Disney's focusing on as I can't speak for them, but in things I've read and in people I've talked to, they're focusing a lot of money into ESPN. Why? Because sports are always going to be something that people watch, look at, because it's teams and people, et cetera, right? The Olympics can't be done with machines. So AI, as we're looking over the next 6 years, might do certain things in creative, right, that change that we can't anticipate. But we know gardening in America is still going to be done in the dirt at people's house, at schools, and gardening and that whole horticulture is usually what you eat. Agriculture is typically what you eat. Horticulture is typically what you see, but there is a blurry line between of all kinds of horticultural things that aren't crops in the USDA sense of it, but that can be part of an experiential thing moving forward. Does that make sense?
We have 2 questions over here. Go ahead.
Hi. So that was a perfect lead into the question I had for you, talking about your content, and I'm particularly interested in the first 2-year block that you mentioned about B2B. Can you talk a little bit about who your target audiences are and what your WIFM is for? 1 or 2, at least give us some examples.
That is exactly what I would expect from you, Lisa Forcell. There's a couple audiences that we know will readily translate into the expo world in the USA. Since 1984 was the last time that there was any kind of an expo, and people don't totally know or understand about them. What we need to do is take a global market, bring it in while we're reaching out to the new consumers. So 2 key areas. One, everybody will know the United Nations audience that works around SDGs and around World Economic Forum is probably the single largest social impact audience. And so that's one of them. And that lives somewhat in consumer, but more in B2B. So that's a primary one. And then the other side of that would be in the US around ESGs. And so how businesses are moving forward with ESG strategy. And while some of them are backing off on having it be a really active part of their business, we find that there might be opportunities for campaigns or measurements or collaborative projects and targeting the consumers or those businesses that are interested in raising that up in a meaningful way. Oh, thank you. And I'm sorry about that. So SDG are the Sustainable Development Goals, and the United Nations has defined 17 of them. It's a very popular thing all over the world to align around climate change or hunger or some of the biggest challenges of our time.
Actually, fun fact about the SDGs,
Ec-
it's the Colombian initiative. So it was the Colombians that came up with it.
So equity, housing, all those yep, there's a number of them. And so we believe that the 8 thematic categories we have, if you looked at our website, not to promote it, but expo2031.org, if you look in our green guide section, you'll see each of those thematic areas, and we've aligned them with those sustainable development goals. And then ESG is environment, social governance. And that is kind of the thing that came after corporate citizenship as a term for business to address social impact kinds of things.
Question from this side of the room.
I guess I'll say first that this is like a mini vacation for my day to day, and the hospitality has been great, and the conversation has been inspiring. Wendy, you talked a little bit about the reality of corporate sponsorship these days, and how you need those corporations to get involved. But I want to ask, when you say you need people to get involved now, I'm assuming you mean more than those corporate sponsors, or I'm hoping you do. And I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about how people can get involved in your efforts now and in the future.
Yes. So thanks, Kim. We have, as we've talked about earlier, there's a whole range of stakeholders, and this will get raised up by what you would consider the typical corporate citizens, agriculture. And if you, again, if I hate to refer back to our green guide, but if you look at those areas, they're thematic almost to different industries. So within each of those thematic areas, we have, for most of you who were here during the days of the Super Bowl, one of the things, they did a number of things really well in how they operated, the volunteers, et cetera. But one of the things they did really well was committees. And they had committees that were formed around, that had all kinds of different stakeholders in them around very specific tasks, right? And so I was the co-chair of the cuisine committee, and we were to raise up chefs and restaurants so that when people came to town. So we're taking a page from that playbook and having different committees. We've started some of them. Our Horticulture Advisor Committee has just started and is actually in week 2 of being convened. And we've got some of the folks in the room here that are participating in that. There will be one around food and all of that. We haven't gotten there yet, but there are a number of ways, and we do have all kinds of different ways that people can get involved, and we can talk about that more. But we're early in we've almost got that phased out as who are early folks, who are next and next. It's a long day till then. So the food category is an interesting one. I know that's where you generally live. And of course that has about 8 buckets in it in our mind. So does that help? And you know my number.
Great, thank you. Hello, my name is Devry Bufner-Vorwerk, and super delighted to be a founding sponsor.
One of the very first.
Yes, but and just so glad we're getting so close. And I wanted to highlight something, and if we can't all answer it now, it's a great opportunity. David, you mentioned AI. There's so much out there in the last, let's just say 10 years on the intelligence of plants, and the book, The Finding the Mother Tree, all of these really brilliant books that we're talking to AI, but there's intelligence work on plants. And I'm wondering if we're thinking about about how we incorporate the intelligence of plants into the conversation, but also, and if I'm putting you on the spot as a founding sponsor, just, bob and weave and dodge my question, but in all of your interaction with the Horticulture Society, I mean, we spend an inordinate amount of time, Portia talked about biodiversity, and we spend a lot of time talking about how we're also going to protect from invasive species and all of that. And I'm just wondering how a Horticulture Expo handles the complexity of being able to bring to life all of the different biodiversity, but also guarding
on not bringing in invasive species or pests, et cetera. And I probably just put you all on the spot, but I'm raising it because I think it's a great opportunity to talk about how we curate and protect biodiversity at the same time as highlighting it. And perhaps there's wiser minds than mine on how we use technology to bring biodiversity to life here in Minnesota as well.
Avery, that's a really great question about like the sort of nuts and bolts, the logistics of like how do these things come to be? And we've studied other. Wendy and I were at the A1 International Horticulture Expo in Doha, and we understood how they did it, and that was in a desert climate. And so, currently our hardiness zone has changed in the Twin Cities, and so as we envision what this would be about, it would be across the selection of plants that are within our hardiness zone. Now, there might be some indoor parts of a country that might do this. And we work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, to do quarantine of those plants and to certify that those are likely okay to bring in. And we kind of work through the logistics. And we have the commitment from both of those agencies to, assist us in making sure that none of it becomes out of control, after the fact. But for the most part, most of those countries will be using the palette of plant material in the most creative way possible that already exists here and do that. And, we have lots of plants here that were never part of North America. We have tulips, for example, never part of North America. So, but now they're part of our displays. So, we have a pretty wide palette to work from. And that's the story of how we'll go that. But I also intrigued by your first part of your question about, the knowledge base that we're understanding. And, different sources say we are just at the tip of the iceberg in understanding the botanical power of medicinal plants, especially from biodiverse countries like Colombia, for example. There's a lot of research into how can we help cure ourselves with a more kind of earthly approach. And that is clearly one of the topics that we'll explore through this expo and how that works, meaning with people who will bring that kind of thought leadership and topic to bear. And so that's all part of that. And maybe we'll have a book or two as a result of the expo itself on this topic.
And if you're a geek about it, I do. So Susan Pell, who runs the U.S. Botanic Gardens, and then there are people at the Smithsonian Gardens, they naturally become our partner because they live under the USDA. And so we're already in conversations with those folks. And so there's a plethora of amazing people, also American Public Gardens Association. So lots of great minds across the country and here.
Well, another great pairing. Portia, thank you so much for being with us today. Continued success to you. David and Wendy, we are excited to watch this come together and be a part of it as well. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you next time. James, thank you.